Good evening, pilots and mercs. Today we're going to be reacting to Battletech Mechwarrior lore, the Amaris Civil War, Part 2. However, I will put a caveat that we may be splitting this video up into 2 parts. Yes, it's ironic, 2 parts for a Part 2 video. However, this thing is 2 hours long. There is supposed to be an intermission in the what is literally a film at this point, which is why I've kind of been a little hesitant to even approach this in the first place because, well, I don't know if my computer can handle about what's probably going to end up being about 2 hours for at least the first video. Like trying to get that out and all that in time for the video today. I'm not sure how that's gonna work, but you know what, this has been a long time coming. I've wanted to see a little bit more about this, so grab your snacks, grab your drinks, and let's get right into the film. The Amaris Civil War and collapse of the Star League. See it?
Attention, Freelance Scout. I am the Khan of Smoke Jacket. You will surrender immediately.
Smoke Jaguar, eh? Well, I hope somebody smokes them soon.
Okay, class. Sit down and shut up. We're going to get through this lesson before we evacuate. You did pay me after all, and this professor needs those student vouchers for booze money. Also, regrettably,
Damn.
It looks like the clanners figured out where I live, and those jokes didn't go over so well. Smoked Jaguar, indeed.
How dare you mock my noble lineage? This is a notice of battle.
Excuse me, fucko. Firstly, interrupting a class is rude. Secondly, this lecture is about Star League, so it's like Baskin-Robbins' 51 flavors of dishonorable. Don't you want these guys to know their history of the noble Star League, of the glories of General Kerensky himself?
I am sorry. Can I sit in? I will still review later.
Yeah, sure, I guess. Just don't go through the wall and take a seat in the back.
Ah, noble founder. This is a good lecture.
This is gonna be great. I can already tell this is gonna be fantastic. Let's go. Preamble and
In
recap.
part 1 of this series, we introduced the brave, the bold, the crazy, and the just plain unfortunate souls who took part in this series of events.
You don't say.
In the beginning, we explored the formation of Star League, a grand, unifying government built around a centralized, efficient bureaucracy encompassing the great 5 houses of the Inner Sphere. We highlighted key events contributing to its growth, rise, peak, and then gradual collapse from increasingly difficult political turmoil.
Most of this was seeded by Amaris, who was playing both sides a little bit, from what I can recall. It's been a week or so, and there's been some people who have been like, you need to finish up this video. Anyways, you have Amaris playing both sides, especially when it comes to getting Star League coffers to the periphery states, trying to fuel them in order to fuel his vengeance upon the Inner Sphere. And so far, it seems to be going pretty decently for the ideal, trying to get his troops from the periphery states into Star League.
In
I
part
digress.
1, we studied the formation of the SLDF, the single largest military instrument ever created, and its utilization to brutally bring the periphery in line at gunpoint, because the Inner Sphere likes a free real estate deal above everything else.
I don't know so much about trying to get them under control because they did fight back. To be fair to be fair, a lot of them did get subjugated for a while and nuked into oblivion. But to be fair, to their credit, they did everything that they could.
He also learned that Stefan Amaris, through his scheming, and scheming alone, managed to destabilize an increasingly shaky government by removing the head of state. Quite literally, in
if anybody
this case.
has that mustache,
to accomplish this, he gambled everything he had. He'd started a war. He put people into the right place at the right time to take control. Together, we discovered that he was a man driven to avenge personal slights against his family, his nation, and his honor by House Cameron, and by extension, Star League. He'd acted out of lust for power, vengeance, and above all, personal vendetta. He alone, through his actions, toppled the...
And I wanted to mention, because a lot of people thought I was siding a little bit with Amaris on this one. I don't really, I was kind of sitting back, like going, I don't care for Amaris, and I don't necessarily care for the Star League either, because the Star League basically, while it was a unified government, it's also just kind of overbearing, if that makes sense. It's like you have this sort of peace that existed. However, unfortunately, it seems more that it's kind of a false peace to some extent with your secret wars and whatnot. So I was more kind of sitting back going, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm going to watch those two fight. And I want to say I didn't pick either side. I'm just kind of sitting there going, like, I don't really care for either of them. And technically it's going to be worse if Amaris wins, but it's like, it's nice to see a Star League fall, but at the same time, it's like Amaris shouldn't be the one here either. So it's just kind of like watching two forces go at each other that are, at the end of the day, I'm not rooting for either side here. It's just kind of like, I'm very much conflicted. But if I was actually going to take sides in this era, I'd be fighting for Star League. Like, let's be real. It's like, I'm a part of the inner sphere. I always have been. Unless I would have been born under the periphery. There would actually be one periphery state I would be a part of, but I digress. We're going way outside of this video's scope for this one.
The old regime through a masterfully orchestrated coup.
And would be one of the less known,
his forces being in perfect position to seize the hegemony in a single act of magnificent barbarism and cruelty. And it is of note that he nearly failed because of the bagpipe, whiskey, and madness-fueled royal unit that was the glorious Black Watch.
Black Watch seems to have... The Black Watch is so well written to the point where it almost seems like they have plot armor. And to some extent they do. But I would still argue the fact that that was a well-written unit for somebody who didn't seem to have literal plot armor. It's like you had to nuke them out of existence, and even at that, there's still a ghost unit running around. Like, that's just... They literally cannot die.
The mad stand of the Black Watch is a tale still told with reverence between Mechwarriors for generations now. And it's very important to understand that in dying the way they did, they sent a message. This wasn't going to be as easy as Amaris had thought. In a magnificent moment of glorious defiance, in a blaze of crazy, mad bastardism, Amaris was reminded of how fragile a thing like victory truly is. And this brush with near death would never leave him. Amaris would, in fact, take increasingly paranoid steps to ensure his reign was secure. He was, in my opinion, haunted by what might have been, and what may yet be.
Because you still have the houses that might come back.
Were just a moment in history, but for Amaris they were a fearful, constant reminder of how easy it could have gone the other way. But we will get to that soon enough.
And it's because I don't think Amaris had a backbone at all. It's like I don't think he had ever really fought. Like, again, this is just a humble Merc's opinion. However, I think Amaris just, like, I think Amaris is a businessman through and through and has no place on the battlefield. And that level of crazy, that level of power, he didn't belong there. He got a taste of what death feels like. And now he's trying to hold on to whatever he just secured. It's like, yes, he managed to achieve it, but how close did the Grim Reaper come to taking him? It's like he has no business leading on this scale. Not by force, anyways. Now, if he had went about it the way the Emperor did in another galaxy, I think he would have had a better time with this, but he went about it this way. Like, if he had just kept it the way things were beforehand, even, that would have been better than this. By some accounts. But anyways, let's continue on.
In the last episode, we also had our introductory study in the profile and career of General Kerensky. We saw how he tried to do his best to keep things as they were, in a delicate political balance and in certainly uncertain times. Kerensky was a powerful general, to be certain, but he was tasked with raising a First Lord and in a very uncertain political arena. Starleague was in decline, and this heir presumptively could have reversed the course of history. He did his best as an advisor and protector, but ultimately he fell back on what he knew best, his duty and oaths to Starleague above all, and that would ultimately doom his efforts. But we'll get to that. And lastly, in part 1, we set the ground for the throwdown of throwdowns, the Guerra on Terra, a war so big it would shake the foundation of the Inner Sphere and lead to centuries of violence, political turmoil, adventurism,
free urban
and
parking. Well, shoot.
As you may recall, we left this lesson on a wonderful cliffhanger.
I still got a few
Amaris
in
had
Mac Bay.
contacted Kerensky and offered everything. A place in the new regime, ultimate power as a general, if not warlord, and very potentially a very real place as inheritor of Starleague itself. But, tempted with everything, the keys to power and the right to use it as he saw fit, Kerensky remembered above all his duty to his oaths, Starleague above all. Kerensky had said no, and it wouldn't be the last time. So here we are at the Amaris Civil War. Warning, if you haven't seen part 1, I'd recommend it. Anyways,
oh no, we
introduction
definitely watched
over, recap over. Here we go. If the theme to Part 1 was the death of Richard Cameron and the after effects of the initial coup, the theme to Part 2 is the death of Starleague. Buckle up, lads. It's going to be a long one.
2 hours, according to the original video. I'm sure this is going to be twice
the
that
Amaris
one.
Civil War would rage from 2766 to 2780 in a 14-year campaign that would decide the ultimate fate of Starleague. It would cost in the end humanity generations of lives in indiscriminate slaughter. Each and every weapon ever crafted by humanity would be used in the greatest contest of wills, arms, and armies ever seen. This war was the end result of, and made worse by, a seemingly endless arms race that until now lacked an outlet for its destructive energies. This was a war unlike any other in the history of man up to this point, so comparisons are hard to make directly. For the first time, humanity was at war with itself across the entire span of the inner sphere. From the Rimworld's Republic to
Not just the inner sphere, technically the periphery too, but I think the periphery was more to itself. It was more into itself for a lot of the Civil War here in the inner
the
sphere.
Terran hegemony, this world would touch hundreds of worlds, leaving many blasted, radiated, and broken wastelands in its wake. This was a war that seldom offered any quarter, and civilian populations died in terror as increasingly destructive weapons were utilized by desperate combatants. This was a war where slaughter was the norm, and strategic weapons were just another tool. At least in the eyes of Amaris. The Amaris Civil War started with surgical precision as a calculated coup, and when Amaris turned from coup phase to an actual war footing, both his Rimworld's Republic and the SLDF stood atop tremendous, though wholly different resources to commit to their campaign. The grand prize in all of this was control of the Terran hegemony, the potential rule of Starleague itself, and by extension the future of the inner sphere. For the sake of historical note, I will have to try to explain something here. While Kerensky was busy in the periphery, Amaris had struck and struck well. The head of House Cameron was vaporized. The inheritors of that name dead or gone. And it is keen to note that consolidating an empire isn't merely a change of flags. Further, when he came under attack by mad bastards who loved kilts, bagpipes, and murder, though not necessarily in that order, he had been reminded on the pain of hubris. Again, for the record, I say this event scarred Amaris. For Amaris was reminded that he was mortal.
He is mortal, and he didn't have the... A lot of people didn't really like him. Yeah, I don't think a lot of people under his control would really fight for him. Not him as his periphery comrades. No, more the inner sphere side of things. But again, you do have the arms as well as the some of the Starleague Defense Force tech, as well as the stuff he had brought from the periphery.
And that it took the use of tactical nukes and many of his best men to stop people so angry they refused to die. It is again my opinion of record that the Black Watch haunted Amaris in ways he'd never considered possible. It's not surprising that he'd be unable to forget the Black Watch. After all, their resistance was quickly becoming a legend. And when a unit's favorite grenade is satchel charges, it seems to leave an impression at the very least. But in the aftermath of nearly dying to the batshit madness of the Black Watch, that brush with the possibility of a gruesome end and failure had, again, in my opinion, a profound effect on Amaris. My evidence is the historical note that he became increasingly paranoid after this event. and began to clamp down on the population to ensure, at any cost, he would be safe. Coup secured, Amaris did not just sit idle. Again, as building an empire isn't something you can
Fun is
handle
now
with
canceled.
a pen.
Bagpipes are also
No, empires are forged by the sword. To the point,
I
in the
love
first
the
week of
background
January,
notes as
Amaris
well.
imported tens of thousands of
Just a nice
hand-picked,
touch.
utterly loyal men from the Rimworld's Republic that would serve as the foundation for the hegemony security forces. Their aim? To make problems go away. By go away, I mean root out dissidents, naysayers, or anyone with any strong objection to Amaris's rule and make them disappear by any means possible. These agents forming the hegemony security forces would, through their calculated, state-sponsored cruelty, give Amaris the power he'd aspired for. Their excesses in cruel methodology would haunt the worlds they touched for generations. Publicly, Amaris insisted on at least pretending things were normal. Normal for Amaris's taste, anyhow. To gain the barest sliver of legitimacy as a ruling power, he called for immediate votes for a new Director General of the hegemony, and further the appearance of legitimacy by directly appointing a hegemony noble to serve.
Ah, the paper tiger method. I can appreciate it. And what I mean by this is, I'll give an IRL example. Russia. I'm not going to elaborate too much on that at this point because that gets further into politics, which, as a merc, not my forte at all. However, I think the comparisons here are apt.
In the interim, until a vote could be had, the vote for the new hegemony Director General was organized swiftly.
Well, yep, this looks just about right.
Through the widespread placement of the new hegemony security forces and thorough integration of Rimworld's Republic units throughout the occupied territory prior to the coup. The vote was held
either
despite
Amaris or
widespread
Amaris.
destruction, panic, and near-total communications breakdown during the coup, and limited repair afterwards. Further, there was the consideration that hegemony analysts projected at best a 10% turnout for the vote, considering the widespread issues with organizing a vote in a chaotic post-coup state. But that wouldn't do for Amaris. He had a new empire to run after all. Amaris claimed an 85% turnout, with 70% overwhelmingly voting for Amaris. This was a fairly amazing feat considering many of these worlds were cut off from the HPG network and over half the planetary governors were dead or missing.
It couldn't be that a lot of these votes were just shipped off to just, I don't know, hand forged or just automatically made and just put it into the coffers somewhere for everybody to count. Specifically handlebar mustache over here, Amaris account, and then claim about 70 to 80%.
Regardless of the legality, Amaris had his title. Those who did report favorable voting turnout did so under extreme duress. But that hardly mattered, as Amaris was, at least provisionally, now the legal Director General of the Terran hegemony. This was abhorrent and horrific to the ruling classes, but it would set the acceptable precedent for generations afterward in practical regime change throughout the Inner Sphere. Once installed as the new Director General of the Terran hegemony, he promised a grand new era of peace and prosperity, that House Cameron's foolishness and mistakes were now at an end, and that the future would be one of unity under his guiding hand. This was not to be just a new hegemony, but a new Star League, reborn as an empire under the guiding vision and limitless power of a new emperor, bold enough to seize it. The HPG networks not critically damaged were slowly reactivated, with the first circuit of SL Comnet firing up to deliver the announcement of Amaris' new empire. Kerensky was the first to issue a reality check. Kerensky's response was legend.
I'm very interested to hear this.
No. The major houses offered something more ambivalent, though. Silence. The great houses did not lend him legitimacy, but they also did not mourn the fall of House Cameron. In a way, their silence answered many questions. First, it demonstrated their feelings about House Cameron. Richard Cameron suddenly disappearing after making some exceptionally poor decisions was seen as a favor, if not boon, to the great houses. There was to be no more meddlesome madness from a fading line of bad rulers. No more directives, laws, or missives from a child playing God. But their silence also spoke volumes of the current assessment of the power balance. They were afraid, after all, and had every right to be. Amaris had done the impossible. He had orchestrated the defeat of the hegemony by stabbing it in the heart. He'd taken the head off the beast, so to speak. He'd overcome defenses designed to be impregnable, and he'd even given the SLDF a black eye.
Basically, what the great houses are looking at is a wild beast just marched into the kingdom through the back door, essentially, shredded all the security, and just unceremoniously just feasted, well, in this analogy, just feasted on the royalty and just sat down on the throne. Yeah, the other kingdoms in the area are gonna go, yeah, no, that looks like a disaster, but it looks like they could be weakened, but until we got more data on that, we're just gonna sit back and not say a damn thing. Because they don't want to suffer the same fate either. It's like, yeah, if a wild beast just broke into the kingdom and they did everything that they could try to do to overthrow this monster, but yet couldn't succeed. Yeah, I'd be a little concerned too. I would be too. That is, again, this is an incredible feat by Amaris here, and most of this went, like, we're looking at this from an outside view. Basically, all they saw was communications went down. The leader of the Starly Defense Force just died, and then Amaris is now the leader. In that quick a succession, it's like, yeah, you'd be a little stunned and silenced too, in this case.
He had done the impossible and done so in such a way as they wondered what else might he have up his sleeve.
And Tex is going to say it much better than I can.
Was Amaris waiting to topple them as well and challenging them to make the first move? In addition, you have to consider that individually the House militaries were somewhat limited by the preceding decades of Star League buildup. They'd been given every excuse to put trust in the SLDF and had done so as arms buildups were exceptionally, if not prohibitively, expensive. Also, SLDF Charter had regulated the size of their militaries, and as such, they knew if they defied and then openly challenged Amaris, they might find themselves overthrown in the name of whatever the hell Amaris was smoking. But on the other hand, they also knew that if Kerensky returned and managed to restore the status quo, any assistance or compliance given to Amaris would become, perhaps, problematic. As such, the House Lords said nothing, and chose no sides, at least officially. However, It is interesting to note that the great houses immediately asked General Kerensky's intentions, and for him to report his movements. The House Lords' response is reasonable. They had their own issues on their own home soil. You see, the Starleague bureaucracy wasn't doing so well, and that somewhat made things difficult from an organizational standpoint. SLDF bureaucrats didn't know what to do. Follow instructions issued from the hegemony from a usurper. Follow instructions issued from a general far, far away. Follow instructions of the great house institutions they supported and paralleled. This wasn't just the case of paperwork and who stamps what. This was a financial network and banking system that held the wealth of billions upon billions of taxpayers. This was the civil infrastructure and logistics system of the greatest nation ever formed. Bureaucrats across the inner sphere struggled with what to do. They were, after all, in a crisis of leadership. With communications difficulties, lack of orders, or in some cases countermanding orders, plus the House Lords offering integration opportunities with their existing systems, many bureaucrats just went home or found new jobs with their house governments.
I would imagine, because, again, this is why I like being a merc, like being a little bit more separated from the system a little bit, or at least attempting to, because I at least know there's going to be a paycheck at the end of the day as long as I work. Now, there might be some issues with that and all that, but regardless, at the end of the day, I can at least show up with my skill set and be like, hey, I can offer some help and get paid for that. These bureaucrats are very much tied into these systems that just got overthrown. What do you do with that? Well, you just kind of sit there and go, it's like, I wouldn't want to work for a usurper, and especially one that's kind of crazy like that. At the same time, you don't really want to say anything because it's like, it's going to be there permanently. Who knows? And I think going home would probably be the best idea right now.
And when their checks started to bounce, they decided to walk away. Some civil servants desperately tried to maintain what services they could, believing in Starleague as it fell, believing it may return someday. Most, however, turned their assets and holdings over to the great houses in their jurisdictional territory, choosing to side with a stable government over one ruled by a potential psychopath.
Good
Throughout
choice.
Starleague,
Good choice.
the overnight conquest of the hegemony destabilized the Starleague dollar, causing widespread economic chaos. The outages of the HPG network further caused rampant speculation and market woes. Without regulatory control or banking afforded by the Starleague financial institutions now either being abandoned or co-opted by the great houses, people pulled their money out of once safe Starleague investments. Throughout the inner sphere, investors transferred enormous wealth from what was once safe Starleague monetary investments and bonds into house bills as soon as they were able. Folks saw the writing on the wall and voted with their wallet. To the common citizen.
And this right here, unfortunately, is where you see the death nail for an entire system like this. Like, yes, you have all the change in leadership and nonsense like that. But if you wanted to see where Starleague died, it's right here. As soon as you have that transfer of wealth from one place to another in a fast motion like that, it's over. Because you have to have stable power. If you're going to upheave a system Like, if you're going to switch out an operating system on your computer, you'd want to at least have the new OS be stable on your system. Otherwise, nobody's going to use that. Nobody's going to use that computer. Nobody's going to use that phone. Like, as soon as your user base pulls out of that system, stops using that because the OS is unstable and goes somewhere else, because again, in this scenario, you're paying with your time, your attention by using it. In this case, you're taking wealth from one system to another. This is where Starleague died, in my opinion. Because again, switching out faces is what happens every single day. When you pull out that much money, that's when Starleague dies.
Starleague as an investment, either financially or the future, was doomed.
There you go. Yep.
And as General Kerensky carefully deliberated his actions, as he knew full well that rash action in this time would doom the cause of Starleague, Amaris continued to reshape the hegemony into his new empire, for to occupy a nation as...
You know what's funny is that this is most likely a joke, right? They're offering free uniforms. I was in the Navy for about 4 years as an IT. I know this is not going to be one of those things I repeat very often, but you know how much we spent in fucking uniforms? It was crazy. Our first check basically went to buying our uniforms. And it's just like, you have to pay to upkeep your uniform. You have to buy the uniforms in the first place. And they're not cheap, by the way. Like, at least one outfit's going to cost you like $200. So basically, you could almost start to afford, for the men, you could probably start affording like suits and whatnot. For the women, you might be able to thrift like a decent dress. It's just like this right here would, at least you get a free uniform.
Stated before is one thing, but to reshape it, that takes time.
Again,
as
probably
stated
a joke,
earlier,
but
Amaris
still.
had founded the hegemony security forces, and those began rapidly forming huge contingents on every occupied hegemony world, recruiting most heavily from those least loyal to Starleague, least loyal to the Camerons, and most swayed by money or the promise of power. Amaris also formed the Director General's Office of Policy and Doctrine. This was more or less an exported extension of Amaris's practice in his homeland, a political officer's corps to police wrongthing. And boys and girls, Amaris hated wrongthing. Amaris
I'd imagine.
punished wrongthing. And wrongthing was defined as anything Amaris didn't like. To eliminate any anti-Amaris sentiment, OPD officers were placed in every government office and building across the hegemony to ensure total compliance with every new governmental policy and memorandum. OPD officers bugged public
I
and
hope
private places,
that
eavesdropped
comes
on
up
all
too, a little
conversation,
bit. I'd like to see what some of
monitored
his
all
policies were.
communications traffic, and watched with practiced eyes all actions taken by any citizen of this new empire. And under their gaze, suspicion alone was enough to warrant severe reprisals. The Terran hegemony was now in essence little more than a garrisoned, heavily occupied police state. Internal security policing actions resulted in the formation of enormous gulags, over which 200,000 were sent the first year alone. Few, if any, ever returned. Amaris's goons promised great monetary rewards for reporting traitors, disloyal citizens, outspoken critics, or even the barest suggestion of subversive activity. Soon, friends and family turned on each other out of desperation or fear. The state was all, and Comrade Amaris was the state. By April that year, Amaris had formally begun the recruiting and training of some 30 divisions to replace and reinforce his holdings on the hegemony. They were raised from hegemony worlds, but trained, led, and equipped by RimWorld's Republic forces. Every defensible position on any garrisoned world was turned into a massively reinforced fortress. The streets of the hegemony were now policed by men rewarded for brutality and wiping out even the barest notion of dissent with overwhelming violence. Reports of death squads roaming the street became commonplace. Outspoken individuals, former SLDF officers, their families and friends all disappeared or fled. Those who criticized the regime or its actions were swiftly erased from history. Amaris's regime had no place for fence-sitters. You were either pro-Amaris, or you were fucking dead. Mercenaries loyal to Amaris were used to conduct the least tasteful work, or at least the work that required a certain essence of plausible deniability.
You could not pay me enough to work anywhere near this place. I know I'm a merc, and it sucks. In this line of work, having morals is just, it's one of those things that I've done some contracts that are, no, I'd prefer not to think about it. But this one just, no. It's almost as bad as working for the Compellans. Almost. You know what? I don't know. They're about the same in my book. But you would not catch me working for this one. There's not enough incentive for me to work from. I'm sorry. I'll be on the periphery worlds dealing with pirates and whatnot, but not this. Not this. The houses aren't much better, but just...
For unsavory purposes, Amaris had retained the infamous mercenary unit, the Greenhaven Gestapo. They were at first just a group of highly morally flexible advisors to Stefan Amaris, but he found that their contributions in taking the hegemony worth rewarding. Ruthless and efficient, the mercs were exactly what Amaris prized. Later on, their war crimes would be a permanent scar on his regime. As stated, the Greenhaven Gestapo was instrumental in the seizing of main Terran government buildings, in displays of savagery and brutality much in line with Amaris's designs. However, once they were turned on the civilian population, things quickly degenerated into looting, pillaging, and murder in the name of state security. As they were mercenaries at heart, the Greenhaven Gestapo decided to make some quick coin and sacked Rome. Why? Well, it was the mercenary tradition long-standing at that time through centuries back to sack Rome, as Rome was historically always a good choice for quick cash and good ransom. Being largely undefended with little in the way of organized resistance, Rome quickly bent to their occupation. And as history will indicate, they ran amok in the Papal States. For example, one of their commanders had a portrait of himself spray-painted over the Sistine Chapel. When 750 Catholic monks had a hunger strike in the square, a member of the Greenhaven Gestapo blocked them in with his rampage and stomped them flat. And then they went further with their fun. They then arrested the Pope after he refused to point out priests who were disloyal to the regime. 3 years later, they'd murder the Pope after he refused to cooperate. Through his mercs, Amaris didn't just target Catholics either. Amaris was, after all, a true atheist and decided the universe was a neater place without the complexities of an organized religion. His death squads oppressed all regardless of their faith.
Look, as a merc, I don't really have any, like, a lot of mercs I don't think have any spiritual or religious views. I'm more spiritual than anything else, but like that only goes to a certain extent, right? It's like I gotta make my way in the universe somehow, and whether I believe there's something out there or not, it's not really gonna stop me from going and making my C-bills, getting in mechs like this dear old crab over here, or really just taking on any sort of contract. But that doesn't mean you paints a bad scar on you when you go and deny other people their religious views.
For he had room for only one form of worship, to the person and glory of Stefan Amaris. All others were impediments to his operations. Such impediments were removed with ruthless precision. Soon enough, the everyday citizen of his new empire would find themselves under his whip. Amaris made hugely unrealistic demands from the population at large, but all the more from its workers and factories. Workers were brutally beaten, tortured, and executed for failing to meet insane projected production schedules. Meeting quotas was rewarded with additional quotas. People worked their fingers to the bone to earn the reward of bony fingers. Food and medicine were in short supply, a supply regulated by priority toward people Amaris saw as doing what he wanted. The economy switched to a war footing as Amaris entrenched every world he could, building strategic weapons stockpiles for what he saw as the inevitable showdown. Factories were increasingly turned over to weapons production, ammunitions production. Fuel and tires and uniforms were churned out in massive stockpiles and put away for the coming storm. Consumer goods disappeared from stores nearly entirely, as supplies other than war material began to run low. While worlds were given increasingly ridiculous production quotas and exhaustive production schedules, this was complicated by Amaris continuing to raise armies and garrisons, further depleting the worlds of their effective labor forces. And some complained, stating they couldn't both raise armies and equip them. However, complaints were not acceptable under Amaris's regime. If a world complained or even reported food shortages, food was withheld and the entire world was punished. Troubles mounting, Amaris soon began to see problems everywhere. People refusing to believe in him were punished. Worlds he suspected of treason he punished. Populations that pushed back were punished. The civilian situation increasingly worsened throughout the hegemony as Amaris squeezed the people for all they had. Food and medical supplies were soon in critical shortage, and he withheld them routinely as yet another measure of punishment. People begging to be fed was just another punishable crime in Amaris's new empire. And after seeing the excesses of Amaris's consolidation of power, of the SLDF being deleted from the hegemony with nuclear, biological, and chemical attacks, of the bureaucrats being shot at their desks for refusing to move a stamp, most citizens realized they had to deal with the realities of the present rather than hope for a brighter tomorrow. After all, they'd seen those who resisted in the initial stages of the takeover being turned into radioactive sinkholes. Hope was, essentially, dead. Slowly but surely, the hegemony descended into a siege mentality, building stockpiles and defenses for the coming long war.
all this, mind you, all this crimes going on against humanity at this point, because General Kerensky is going to come back and absolutely crush them in a showdown. That in the houses. I will bet you the Draconis Combine has some mechs somewhere. I would bet you good seabells. Like talking with other pilots and whatnot, I'm pretty sure the Draconis Combine has some mechs sitting underground somewhere. I would bet you most of the houses do if they're smart enough, but Draconis Combine for sure.
Through excesses in human suffering, Amaris made significant headway. He reinforced the hegemony in ways the Star League never considered. He knew the shortcomings of Star League's extensively planned defenses, for he'd found weaknesses in and exploited them after all. Through hard work and exceptional human suffering, he turned peaceful yet defensible worlds into hellish death traps. He reinforced every fortification for any conceivable attack, siege, or protracted battle. He ordered his men to drill exhaustively and to constantly train to avoid embarrassment like the 4th Amaris Dragoons fighting mad bastards wearing kilts. He ordered the construction of bunkers, hardened defensive points, and extensive space-borne defenses as well. Please try to understand that Amaris, while having extensively prepared, knew the full might of the SLDF Navy, which was enormous and quite inclined to fuck things up if given the opportunity. The war in the stars went well for Amaris because his men got lucky, and after several bloody fights seized the space defense network. But he knew the bulk of the Navy would return with Kerensky, and so men were trained extensively on the operation of established space defense systems. These space defense systems would figure heavily into Amaris's plans, as his navy suffered heavily in pushing the SLDF out of the hegemony in the initial stages of the coup. The Star League Navy had accounted for itself well, and there were holdouts still hiding in the hegemony, doing much to harass and spy on Amaris's doings from secret locations. I may, if you all are interested, do a whole talk on the grand old Star League Navy, but I'll spare the details for now, as that would be yet another hour. Let me know. Might be fun anyways. Worlds under Amaris's thumb were patrolled for the first sight of the SLDF. Drone ships constantly hunted the hegemony for even the smallest observation craft, making intelligence gathering for the SLDF a precarious venture, if not a lethal operation. As now established, each house, now concerned with many possible futures and not wanting to back a loser, decided to mostly stay out of it. As such, the war broke down to the principal antagonists. Side A was the forces of Stefan Amaris, leading the occupied Terran hegemony systems, including their now extensively reinforced defenses growing stronger by the day. Further, he was aided by powerful defense industries in the hegemony long established as the primary arms producers of the Inner Sphere. He held these in addition to the Ascendant Rimworld's Republic, which he had secretly prepared its industry, economy, and military specifically for this conflict. I won't be vague here. Let's put this into numbers. Amaris's own forces included at least 100 regiments of battle mechs alone. To keep in mind, a single regiment of battle mechs is 150 to 180 fucking mechs plus support divisions.
So you're talking in the range of like 150 to 175,000 battle mechs. That's insanity. Oh, okay.
Amaris also had the entire naval and aerospace assets of a great house many times over. Through his house's careful preparation for the coup, minus the early lumps handed to him by the SLDF Navy.
Still,
he
that's
maintained
not
a
too
strong
bad,
grip on the
considering.
Rimworld's Republic, in addition to all the hidden SLDF weapon stockpiles in the occupied hegemony. Historical notes show us that for decades, the SLDF had warned that the Rimworld's Republic was building an army many times over what they were allowed by Star League treaty. Warnings that were now far too late. For the record here, there is some dispute over the total naval assets of Amaris, but it is said that he possessed over 270 warships prior to the coup. Many of
And just to point out everything on the battlefield here, each warship basically means you can show up and basically occupy a planet. He can essentially occupy 271 planets. Now, again, logistically, occupying 271 worlds outside of the hegemony and basically the middle of the inner sphere is not going to be in his best interest, but force projection could allow him to do that. Now, again, trying to run supplies back and forth between these worlds and keep his grip on them is not going to be as good, but potential is here.
Were as good, if not better, than the SLDF fleet. House armies had 50 to 70 warships at most, and many of those were not line ships. Most House navies had a small core flotilla of capital vessels, and then the remainder was split between patrol and support vessels for anti-piracy duties. And as established, the Rimworld's Republic had patiently built a war machine for generations just for this single moment. Every industry and government plan had been laid down on the principal need to feed a war-fighting capacity, to challenge the SLDF openly if need be. Hell, Amaris had even built enormous battleships, which were better protected than SLDF's biggest warships. They called them the Amaris class, by the way, because Amaris is, well,
egotistical.
Don't make me get the bib picture out again. The guy had issues that were only solved by, well, enormous battleships named after himself, because that's the kind of guy he was, and okay, we'll do this again. Look, he's wearing a bib. This guy has some problems, and who the fuck is holding his arm? Is that like the general manager for the Golden Corral of Space Kansas? It's not inspiring. If you take someone's head off and brilliantly overcome the greatest defenses yet designed, wear something nice like a smoking jacket. Editor, can we do that? And a top hat. Class him up a bit. I know people are going to go nuts over someone so Machiavellian looking, just
only
like a
pasting
goof,
hot dogs.
Just class him up a bit, like 2 notches. Good. Better. Anyways, while Amaris had lost significant...
God, the editing is just top tier here.
...numbers of his navy to the initial space battles and the hegemony, he was now building new hulls on Star League yards and blueprints. Further, he was rapidly training
I will
his
not have the disrespect. Hold on. I saw that. I just didn't eat your heart out, John Moses.
On Star League yards and blueprints.
There should be no
he was rapidly
disrespect
training
in
his
here.
men thoroughly on the operation of the now captured SDS networks. Soon all that power would be firmly in his hands. Needless to say, Amaris was sitting on an enormous stockpile of world's weapons and personnel to throw into the fray. He was growing stronger by the day. He awaited Kerensky's next action, trying to bait him into attacking the hegemony directly after being bogged down. So let's look at the opposite side of this equation. Side B of this conflict was the SLDF, a huge multinational force which had now been bogged down in years of counterinsurgency fighting in the periphery. Worn down by years of hard campaigning spread across the entire periphery, bloodied and bitter at putting down a needless insurrection, and now devastated at the loss of their friends and comrades in the hegemony. The SLDF was certainly on the back foot from the beginning, not to mention now being completely cut off from any reinforcement or supply. Losses in the periphery uprising and rebellion, plus hegemony losses in the coup, put total SLDF manpower by 1,255 regiments. I'll say that again as a chill runs down your veteran friend's spine. 1,255 regiments. Gone. 30% of the SLDF's effective military strength from pre-war levels was now totally gone. History has shown us that armies rarely bounce back from losses such as these, if at all. The survivors were now hollow men and women haunted by a horrific, senseless war in the periphery, and now many of them were without a home, or a government, or a cause. The hegemony was occupied, and the status of the First Lord at this point was an unknown. Some would point out that the SLDF had the numerical advantage here, including far superior numbers and naval assets. It is worth noting that the SLDF was split into regional commands. In addition, Kerensky was unable to draw upon the additional resources from the great houses he expected, or even in the occupied hegemony. An army this large would soon need massive resupply before any campaign of conquest, and they had no infrastructure other than what they could seize and capture. There was no infrastructure to replace their extensive losses, no recruitment centers, no resupply and logistics train available. The great houses were not going to help them. They were on their own. Having an army all the larger than your opponent does no good when supplies run low or out. The SLDF was cut off and in a desperate state the day House Cameron fell. They had lost over 30% of their strength mauled into combat ineffectiveness in the periphery war. They had lost 1 million men before the coup had even started. Further, with the collapse of the Star League bureaucracy came the near total loss of operational budgets and supply. The SLDF at the start of 2767 had, at best, 10% of its former budget trickling in from tax collectors and administrators still loyal or alive. There would be no paychecks from here forward, and procurement divisions had no means to buy anything at any price. Things were grim. The SLDF teetered on the brink. Kerensky's forces had fought a needless war. They had learned that their home was gone and their leader replaced by a madman. They had no money, no country, and seemingly no future. Supplies were exhausted, ships needed refit and overhaul, and spares disappeared. Morale was accordingly near zero. They needed a fucking miracle. What the Star League Defense Force had, though, was General Alexander.
That's a hell of a state for your entire... I didn't even think of the repercussions of all that. Like, yeah, that just completely cuts them off. Like, they are essentially just a mercenary company at this point. Like, the entirety of the Star League Defense Force is just just a mercenary company at this point. Except worse, because... Except kind of worse at this point, because there's no mercenary contracts, there's no mercenary review board, there's nothing. There's literally just nothing there for them to draw upon. Unless you count just raiding periphery worlds for their assets, but that's about it.
Sergeyevich Kerensky,
like, they'd be pirates,
and angry Russians tend to make it into the history books. Kerensky had purpose and determination. Instead of weighing his options endlessly or sending his troops home, instead of obeying his government, instead of giving up and running away or trying to bargain and buy favor, Kerensky had told the usurper no, just flatly no. Amaris had mocked him in reply. Amaris had mocked him and challenged Kerensky to try to attack him. And it would have been suicidal, as the extensive space defense systems in the hegemony were designed to stop massed fleets and invasion forces. And as said, Amaris had paid the price in conquering them, and yet every moment that Amaris had in the hegemony he would be digging in and preparing to defend what he had claimed. It was an...
And I do want to point out some of this fuzz that you might be seeing, I think could be AI upscaling, not on Tex's part, but it's either a VHS film effect, or YouTube is applying AI upscaling, and it's kind of messing with the video a little bit. I've seen that recently on some videos. I'm not entirely sure if that's happening here. Again, I want to be very clear. The Black Pants Legion does not use any AI whatsoever. I'm not accusing them of that. It's just YouTube upscales a lot of videos sometimes. And sometimes the AI leaves behind a filter like this. Sometimes. Again, this could just be a VHS filter. But I do want to point that out and clarify that it does do that sometimes, and it does look like this. So if you've seen that, that's why. Anyways.
An enviable scenario to contemplate. Kerensky at this point had two choices: to drive into the hegemony immediately, to attack the RimWorld's Republic forces now deeply entrenched and in possession of the space defense systems and all the massive weapons stockpiles the hegemony had, or Kerensky could go kick the shit out of Amaris' homeland, the RimWorld's Republic.
Yeah, he's probably gonna go raid the he's gonna go go take on the RimWorld for supplies.
Kerensky decided that if Amaris would occupy his home, then Kerensky could burn Amaris's down. Well, more or less. There were strategic considerations for this. Kerensky rarely acted out of emotion, so this wasn't just done out of pure spite or want to exact revenge. This wasn't ego-driven, but a more calculated response. Kerensky refused to fall for Amaris' trap and instead opted to hit Amaris' home to cut Amaris off from his beloved RimWorld's Republic, its resources, and any hope of significant reinforcement. As well, if the gamble proves successful, this would utterly trap Amaris' forces in the hegemony, buying Kerensky time to maneuver, politic, and perhaps involve the rest of the inner sphere. Additionally, the income of the RimWorld's Republic was exceptional, and by removing Amaris' purse strings even partially, he would make the inevitable throwdown in the hegemony far easier. Kerensky made his preparations. He told his men what they must do. He visited ships throughout the fleet and mustered his forces from jump points around the periphery. He made certain
Operation
to
Sleepy Weasel, Save the SLDF, question mark, Amaris mad. I love it.
immediately changed
I
the
love this
ciphers and
operation.
communications keys for his entire fleet, as by now he was certain SLDF communications were totally compromised through Amaris' capture and control of the hegemony. Orders were often hand-carried and eyes only. This would be an ambitious undertaking, and there was no room for error. Kerensky told his men and women that they would be launching on a grand campaign to restore Star League and stop Amaris. He gave appropriate speeches for morale's sake, reinforcing the purpose of his mission. This wasn't about revenge. This was about Star League. For as long as they lived, the dream was alive. They were soldiers and sailors and had work to do. Through this, he reminded the fleet of its duty. They had a mission. He also made moves to mitigate the supply shortfalls as best possible. His war plan hinged on the ability to forage what they needed from the RimWorld's Republic. To feed a conquest in essence through conquest, he ordered parts of his own forces, his own ships, his own mechs, his own tanks and stockpiles to be cannibalized for the war effort.
And honestly, I kind of figured to some extent it would go this way, but I didn't think he would take on the periphery side of things. I didn't think he would go after Amaris' homeworld necessarily. I didn't necessarily think that that was an idea. It's not that I didn't think he couldn't do that. It's just I didn't necessarily think that would be the first idea. Does sound it does sound plausible though, since it would force Amaris out of hiding. It's a solid idea, solid plan. But I wonder how it's going to turn out
He
for him.
radically increased his operational equipment stockpile by eliminating the most damaged ships, mechs, and tanks and stripped those of parts to keep the rest going. SLDF stockpiles were raided. Kerensky ordered sold what he didn't immediately need to war profiteers in the growing black market to keep the SLDF going. He merged ruined regiments into new combined regimental combat teams. He consolidated his forces and told them that they would conquer the Rimworld Republic and take it from Amaris before liberating the hegemony and restoring rightful order. Kerensky was not keen to make rapid strikes without proper intelligence. Cautiously, Kerensky assessed his situation, seeing what he was up against in the Rimworld's Republic. Through his intelligence services, Kerensky suspected and then became aware of clandestine dealings in the inner sphere. Kurita had been a staunch supporter of Amaris and his dealings. Kerensky suspected that post-coup that arrangement was still in place. Meanwhile, House Merrick had extensive...
Of course it's the Draconis Combine. Yep, of course it's the Draconis Combine. I just, again, of course it's them. They are the House Kurita is one of those places they leave a sour taste in my mouth. I hate working with them. But again, I think the general strategy here is very sound and apt. Like, he's turned a lot of this into a decent situation. And if you can force Amaris out of the hiding hole, then it might actually work. But this showdown is going to be interesting. But I don't think we're going to get there today.
Interfered with SLDF deployments during the Periphery War, and now, afterwards, were apathetic to the cause of the SLDF, to say the least. The source of that contention was personal animosity. Kerensky once had a young Kenyan Merrick on his general staff and checked his ambitions, and Merrick never forgot. These complications meant that Kerensky could only possibly count on the other houses as, at best, potential allies. Even then, their responses were not enthusiastic. But he knew they would at least not be maneuvering against him, and the Periphery had an altogether more interesting response. The Periphery really didn't care the Cameron line had ended with a bang. Even if the whereabouts and status of Richard Cameron were currently unknown to the galaxy at large, the populations of the Periphery did, however, care deeply when the SLDF showed up to fight a brutal war on their home turf. The SLDF had emboldened the Periphery's long-standing anti-authoritarian, anti-inner streak by showing up to be exactly what they feared most, conquering assholes. But when Amaris took over, the Periphery soon saw their savior really didn't care a single fuck about them all that much. Amaris had issued orders for Kerensky to conquer the Periphery, to keep pressure on them, to crush them once and for all, and then to join Amaris's new empire. Upon realizing they were sold out, the Periphery was upset. For the Periphery had once at least somewhat trusted Amaris. After all, he was one of them. The Rimworld Republic was the greatest Periphery nation, after all. He was the nice fat guy who'd given them shitloads of money and weapons and pointed them at the SLDF, and
You see, as somebody who's a part of the inner sphere, I gotta say to a lot of these Periphery states, I'd be going with the magistrate over here personally. Is somebody who has been in the inner sphere for a while, I'm sorry. You know, I really am. It's like we don't like the houses. We don't really like yes, LDF sometimes, but y'all didn't deserve to be crushed underfoot. And you know what? If you ever need some pirates taken out, we can definitely talk about that. We can definitely talk about getting some contracts going because I don't know, it'd be nice to get away from the inner sphere for a little bit and not have to deal with this or Amaris
Now
over
they
here.
realized they'd been played. The Periphery was now content to let Amaris deal with his own problems and let the SLDF leave uncontested. They had lost enough of their own and gained perhaps, at least notionally, their independence. They were content to let things be. After this point, the Periphery would offer no substantial opposition for Kerensky's new goal, to wrecking ball the Rimworld's Republic. In fact, many Periphery states met with the general and provided him full transcripts, intelligence, and information on Amaris's duplicity and dealings. This information would make Kerensky's conquests all the smoother. Kerensky jumped on the Rimworld's Republic with a slightly rejuvenated SLDF, and in time his conquest became a campaign of legend. While Amaris had taken the bulk of his military...
What the... Is that a... No. Is that a king crab? It's pancake shaped. It's got them chicken legs. I would say that's a king crab. I don't know. Yeah, that is a king crab. That is the early version of the king crab if I had ever seen one. Again, it's just odd to see it like that because it's as flat as a pancake. It just... The arms are so, like, stocky anyways.
To occupy the hegemony. The Rimworld's Republic was not a complete pushover as far as the Periphery states went. After all, this was the place that Amaris had forged into a conquering nation-state. It was a nation built by a paranoid, psychotic asshole. House Amaris had primed this nation for war at every level through generations of careful work to further their strategic aims. It maintained a reasonable standing army by Periphery standards. It possessed a ruthlessly efficient internal security force, a tremendous strategic reserve, a well-educated population, and a massive defense industry. Taking the Rimworld's Republic was the smartest choice Kerensky could make. Taking it would cut Amaris off from extensively developed defense industry and ample recruiting grounds, not to mention a key source of income. On May 29, Kerensky issued the go order from his flagship McKenna's Pride. The fleet assembled at jump points, messages being hand-carried with new ciphers to ensure security. Across the Periphery, forces abandoned their conquest to rejoin the main fleet, often carrying with them the contents of SLDF bases they'd stripped for necessary supplies. Troops falling back set nasty reminders that Starlink property was not to be trifled with. Concordat troops found that out the hard way, when upon entering the Starlink base it collapsed on their head after a mountain of charges went off. Similarly, across the Periphery, Starlink bases were abandoned, trapped, and stripped of any and all resources Kerensky would need for his operation. This was an all-or-nothing gambit. Amaris had slowly bled the Rimworld Republic forces of their strength to set up his coup and occupation of the hegemony. It would still be a monumental endeavor. The Republic was enormous and well-provisioned, and while the Rimworld's Republic had dug in, they didn't have the numbers the SLDF massed fleet had. Every delay in attack would buy time for Amaris to fortify the Rimworld Republic and hegemony both. Any other commander would have opted for speed alone in a campaign of nuclear hellfire and motherfucking revenge. Any other commander would have let his men and women loose in the name of vengeance, to let slip the dogs of war and count the dead afterward. But Kerensky was not a monster.
He's not a monster. He's just a man of duty, which I can respect. I can respect that. Like, And it's so sad to see, like, it's so sad to see his prodigy, which a lot of you caught me on. I appreciate that. Go off and create the clans. Because this is not a man of vengeance. This is man of duty, which I can respect that.
He refused to authorize a total war approach and saved weapons of mass destruction for hardened military targets. But it would still be a war. There would be casualties. Kerensky took a careful approach, trying at his hardest to not indiscriminately slaughter his enemies for the sake of a decisive, rapid campaign. He didn't see the Rimworld's Republic as an enemy, merely, in this case, an adversary. He saw his job as to restore the peace from an unlawful usurper, not to punish a population or conquer purely to feed his army. Further, Kerensky knew he had to crush the Rimworld's Republic to strand Amaris in the hegemony, to cut Amaris off from the resources of the Rimworld's Republic and prevent a difficult two-front war. Amaris flipped out at the impending invasion and almost immediately called on his hidden army in the form of formerly loyal periphery allies to assist. Most chose now to do what Kerensky had done to Amaris.
They told him no.
No. Amaris had betrayed them after all. A bare few moved to reinforce Amaris's holdings, but for the most part the stage was set for what unfolded. Kerensky split his forces to conquer effectively, with commands each having objectives, timetables, and resources appropriate to their abilities and talents. Further, he split some of his forces to go conduct reconnaissance in the hegemony, just to poke at Amaris and make him wonder if it were all a diversion. Kerensky put half his army under the command of his trusted adjutant, General Aaron D. Chevalier. Their forces ran with 3 armies each and 4 in reserve. The plan was to rapidly punch through the hegemony and roll them up before any counterattack was possible, leaving the capital for last. Kerensky sent a message to Amaris' stooge running the Rimworld's Republic as Amaris was busy playing police state in the hegemony. Kerensky offered surrender and no ill treatment if the Rimworld's Republic would merely stand down. Amaris' stooge said no, and then Kerensky attacked. In theory, what Kerensky intended was considered to be near impossible, if not exceptionally difficult, and doubly so with an army that effectively had no reserve or logistical support other than what they carried, scrounged, or stole. If they took any significant losses, there was no real chance to replace anything. Their numbers of mechs, tanks, rifles, bullets, and band-aids were finite. At first, Kerensky was cautious, both to spare his own men material losses and the civilian population the cruelty of war. But when the hidden army failed to respond to Amaris and the Rimworld Republic failed to counterattack, it was on like Donkey Kong, and the outcome was pretty fucking incredible. Kerensky conquered all 248 worlds in 3 short years. To say this was a blitzkrieg is a massive understatement. That's almost 7 worlds.
I love how 200 worlds in 3 years is quite the accomplishment. Like that's just basically, I think he's going to say here, but just like a 3-year campaign, that is incredibly quick, even for the SLDF. But again, it is Kerensky, so.
Worlds a month. 7 defended garrison militarized populations a month. One by one, the worlds fell like clockwork in a master plan. The SLDF was Kerensky's tempered vengeance visited upon Amaris' legacy, while again, carefully sparing damage to civilian infrastructure. What's worse, unwilling to budge his own forces to assist, Amaris could only sit and watch from occupied Terra as his home went dark one system at a time. The Rimworld Republic forces had the benefit of preparation and an extensive home field advantage. Further, they were bolstered by paramilitaries and extensive security forces. However, they didn't have the numbers of the SLDF. Kerensky embraced his tactical advantage and just steamrolled them into the earth while they died defending pointlessly. As the war rolled on, many Rimworld's units threw down their arms, risking the wrath of political officers none too pleased. The reason for abandoning the cause was simple. They saw themselves as citizens of the RimWorld's Republic first and supporters of Amaris as a distant second.
Honestly, at that point, it's just like, yeah, at that point, you're just going to be steamrolled. And second off, yeah, you're technically tied to this Amaris person who you're not even really loyal to in the first place. So political officers are going to be upset, but I mean, you also have somebody who's steamrolling through this place. So yeah, I think it's time to call the quits.
Amaris had failed them, and they weren't willing to die for a bib-wearing overlord. No, they were more inclined to follow Kerensky, and some did. Kerensky allowed them to serve, and some would, with distinction, try to right the wrongs of their former overlord. That's not to say there weren't some holdouts. Some die-hard RimWorld's Republic soldiers would just feign surrender to detonate suicide vests, echoing the sentiments of the periphery just a few short years earlier. As the RimWorld's Republic government fell, armed militants and militias rose to fight their former overlords, the SLDF or each other. Mass stockpiles of weapons found their way to the hands of increasingly angry populations intent on shooting anyone not aligned with their ideology. There was something else to consider as well. Authoritarians have a bad habit of leaving people in charge that they can trust rather than someone with a spine. Naturally, the administrator left in charge of the RimWorld's Republic, while loyal to Amaris and a capable bureaucrat, was, at most, a spineless yes-man. Kerensky conquered his way to the heart of the RimWorld's Republic in an impossibly short time span considering the above complications. I'm sparing you the details of a 3-year campaign at this juncture.
Love how this planet is called Anywhere, by the way. Oh yes, I live on Anywhere. Which planet? I live on Anywhere. Next to the Dark Nebula.
I may perhaps revisit it in detail later.
Oh, and there is, hold on. Doggone it. I messed it up. Yeah, there it is. Summers. This is where the jokes from the Battletech cartoon are from. Yep, I saw.
The capital of the RimWorld's Republic. Kerensky had approached Apollo carefully, saving it for last. He'd thoroughly isolated it before this point, blocking HPG traffic that the SLDF decided the RimWorld's Republic didn't need to hear. Fleets patrolled the system to ensure no use of pirate points for messages or reinforcements, and jump points were now long secured by the SLDF. Kerensky wanted the leaders of the RimWorld's Republic to sit in communications blackout, wondering what the hell was going on, stewing in their own fear. In fact, Apollo had been cut off through careful maneuvering by Kerensky for well over a year by the time he struck. Kerensky took to the field, making planetfall himself to find loyalist Amaris forces engaged in a brutal suppression campaign against their own people. Further, newly constructed fortresses provided some resistance, though they were dangerously undermanned. Internal security had obviously been an issue for some time. Before long, the SLDF had things in hand, with defectors and surrendering RimWorld's forces deeply straining the SLDF's capacity to hold prisoners of war. By the time the SLDF dropped in on the grand capital of the RimWorld's Republic, the SLDF were seen as heroes and liberators by a war-weary population. The average RimWorld citizen had long been under the thumb of a ruthless tyrant from a family of tyrants, and for the first time in their lives had a chance to live the promise of a freer life. When the SLDF rolled into Amaris's capital, they found the streets full of jubilant celebration upon their arrival, and Amaris's chancellor hanging from a lamppost. The government of the RimWorld's Republic was utterly crippled, its soldiers dead, surrendered or defecting, its bureaucracy in pieces, and its government stockpiles either seized by the SLDF or looted by growing warlords. Kerensky was not interested in garrisoning these worlds with any force. He aimed to rapidly move on as Inner-Sphere houses rapidly mobilized their own forces to absorb portions of the once mighty RimWorld's Republic for provisionally their own good. After all, it's free real estate. Through great house annexation, many worlds of the Rimworld's Republic would, in time, become the periphery-facing territories of the Lydran Commonwealth and other nation-states. Some would splinter off to become pirate kingdoms, fiefdoms, and micronations. In time, others would disappear completely, content to be ignored by the galaxy at large. Kerensky did not have time to think about the fate of the Rimworld's Republic. Again, he took time to consider the path forward. The Rimworld's campaign had taken a toll on his forces, but by now the SLDF was well practiced in moonlight acquisition. Every world they conquered, they stole supplies of armaments, tech, and parts from the Rimworld's Republic military and defensive industries storehouses. Every time a ship became stranded, damaged beyond repair, or decrewed, they stripped it for parts and moved on. Every time a regiment was appreciably reduced in manpower, Kerensky would fold in another and then keep fighting. The once fairly green pre-periphery insurrection SLDF was now a veteran of many hard campaigns, each and every unit filled now with hardened, battle-scarred veterans. While equipment would be maintained, the SLDF was slowly losing its strength all the same. Kerensky knew that they needed time to rest, for training camps to be set up, and for new blood to fill its depleted ranks. Kerensky, being not a moron, decided to wait a few years to rebuild and thoroughly explore how to utterly destroy Stefan without eradicating the cradle of humanity in the process. Amaris had spent his time digging in. The Rimworld's Republic army is slowly making the hegemony a death trap. Each and every world prepared for invasion that was not only possible, but now inevitable.
I love how I absolutely love how they went from basically a splintered force when Amaris took over Terra and the rest of the hegemony, and basically were able to gather everything that they needed in order to move forward. It speaks to a war style that I would love to look into more of and see how that's actually done. Because it's one thing for it's one thing for it to be briefly mentioned here, but I'd love to see how that would function on a day-to-day basis. Because it's like, yes, he did that, but how? Like, how would that work on a day-to-day battle? It'd be interesting to see, because I'd love to work with that, like, in my own sort of campaign. It's like outside of like, how do you actually take this and apply it to a different situation? Because whether or not I could make it work for a campaign, I would love to see how this works. Like, this is giving me appreciation for Kerensky's war style overall, and I'm gonna have to dig in a little bit more to this.
Cut off from his beloved Republic and watching Kerensky smash it from afar had made Amaris a wee bit bitter. This steeled his resolve to resist at all costs, for there was no going home now. There was also the consideration of watching your own home slowly burn and what that does to a man. In the case of Stefan Amaris, it drove him slightly crazy. Well, crazier.
Yes, I was about to say. All right. That is gonna do it for today. We've been here for over an hour at this point, and this video has to make it out today. I'm going to do the best I can to try to split this up, but this is where we're at right now. Again, we're going to pick this up in the next video, and I want to say thank you to everyone who has watched up into this point, and if you want to support the Black Pants Legion, there's a link in the description or up in the cards, and other than that, this has been Annika, signing out.